Hi, welcome back to another episode of Nobody's Doing It Right, the podcast for those who are uncertain. My name is Kat. I'm your host. For today's episode, we're going to talk about how you should stop making your identity sacred. And what I mean by this is that I'll talk to a lot of people who obviously go to therapy and are looking for therapists or are looking to grow, change, improve, whatever. And sometimes I'll get people who have been in therapy for a long time and still act in the ways they did that maybe harmed them or weren't good or healthy for them. And they still are behaving the same way. So I see people who don't have much change in their behavior despite going to therapy, despite wanting to do that kind of work, which will inevitably change you. And I'm not saying that everybody has to change or that someone's not good enough and therapy is about making them better or more worthy. No. It's just if someone recognizes within themselves that they have behaviors that are not healthy or good for them, or they send them into spirals of, emotions that aren't beneficial in any way, or sends them into dynamics with people that are not healthy for them, it's important to acknowledge that and also try and change that, because at the end of the day, it's what's good for you. Not for anybody else, but for you, so that you can live a life that feels okay for you, right? But if I see somebody who has done that for a long time, or someone is telling me that they're having a hard time making these shifts, my first question is, are you scared of challenging your identity? And I think that is a big thing for many of us. I'm not going to say that I'm any better necessarily. I do try my best to, push through my ego when it comes to that. And I think that's what's helped me overcome a lot of this and been able to change and grow a lot. I've had to really put down my ego and allow myself to challenge the things I've always known about myself, or the things I've always believed about myself, rather. And that's really important. If we make our identity sacred, we will resist challenging it, questioning it, and changing it. But ultimately, you don't really have an identity. Like, the identities that we have, the way we see ourselves, who we think we are, these are things that we decide on, we put on ourselves. Sometimes they're put on us by other people and we feed into that belief and we take it on as part of us. But it's not true necessarily, right? You get to decide who you are, how you see yourself, how you present yourself. I think when we identify too closely to these, these identities that we're wearing as blankets, almost a protection, when we identify too closely to these identities, we lose sight of the fact that even if they're not serving us, we cannot let them go because they've become so tied to us as people, as who we think we are. Like, we cannot let them go. And that in itself is the reason why I think so many of us struggle with making the necessary changes and shifts that would be beneficial for us, particularly in therapy. Therapy forces you to have to look at that stuff. And a lot of people can go into therapy and not do that at all, not do any of that work. And that's okay. Like, I'm not saying that anything is right or wrong, good or bad, right? You can go to therapy and just have a therapist to talk to. And that's totally valid. But I'm talking specifically to those who are really struggling to make change. Like, they want to change. They want things to change. They want themselves to change. Maybe it's because you're identifying too much to this idea of yourself. You're making your identity sacred and not letting yourself challenge it. You're creating almost this like godlike figure in your mind of the image you have of yourself, to the point where you cannot even touch it. But you have to tear it down. You have to be able to shed it like an old skin that you don't need anymore in order to be able to make the shifts and changes that you need to make to become a different version of yourself. Not a better version necessarily, or a worse version or whatever, just a different one. One that can at least be a little bit more aligned with what you want to experience in this life. I think that's so important, and I think that's one thing that's so difficult too. It's maybe the hardest thing to do, right? Everything you've known about yourself, everything you've been told to know about yourself, you have to question it and decide to think differently. That is so tough because there's a lot of ego, there's a lot of discomfort in doing that, in questioning yourself. Because if you remove this identity from you, if you remove this idea of who you always thought you were, then who are you? And the answer to that is that you're whatever, everything and nothing at the same time. And that's really overwhelming. There's a lot of uncertainty there, and that's scary. It's uncomfortable. And sometimes challenging this identity you've always had will force you then to disconnect from some people in your life who have always related to you because of that identity. It'll force you to maybe go against what your parents have always wanted for you or how they've always seen you. And maybe that makes you think that, oh my God, to change myself in this way, to really be honest with myself about this identity that I've been wearing this whole time would mean maybe losing the relationship I have with my parents. That's really tough stuff. It's not easy to work through that. So I'm not saying that this is a simple process, or I'm not trying to shame anybody who struggles with it. But I think it's important to really be honest with yourself, honest with how you are showing up and presenting yourself. Because I think I also see this in people, and even in myself in the past too, where there's discrepancies in the behavior, right? They'll act a certain way, but believe themselves to be a different way because they don't want to shatter that identity they have, but they also want to be different. It's like there's this cognitive dissonance between the two where it's like not you or the other person that you're trying to present yourself to. Nobody understands what's going on, right? Because it doesn't make sense, because half of you wants to be changing and doing different things and being, a different version of yourself. The other half wants to hold on to that old identity still for safety and security. It's not how it works, right? Something's got to give. And so if you hold on too much to the identity and still are trying to change, maybe just subconsciously you're being guided to things that will help you grow and change, but you're still holding on to that identity, you have been like splitting yourself in half, basically. You're becoming two different versions of yourself in one. You're not finding a lot of, unity or integration with all the parts of you. And that then makes it even harder to navigate life, because you're like, I'm showing up this way, but I'm thinking I'm this kind of person. Or maybe you're blocking off the awareness of certain parts of yourself so that you don't have to face that cognitive dissonance. It gets messy, it gets really complicated, and it's not beneficial for you. It's not beneficial for the people in your life. And so it's really important to challenge the identity you have of yourself. Ask yourself, why do I think this is who I am? Who told me that this is who I am? Do I like this identity? What would happen if I changed it? What would I rather be? What fits better for me? What do I have to let go of? What do I have to lose potentially to change this identity? Like, really be honest with yourself. And of course, there's nothing wrong with identifying with a certain image or idea of yourself, because sometimes we need to do that to stay safe and protect ourselves, especially in certain, dynamics and relationships, of course. So this isn't, again, to shame anybody for it. I'm just saying it if you're struggling with really making the shifts and changes that you want to make and you don't understand why. It might be that you're clinging too tightly to an identity of yourself, this image of who you think you should be or who you think you are, instead of just letting it go and letting yourself be nothing, but in a more liberating way than it sounds, right? Because I think, again, letting go of identities and saying to yourself, like, I am nothing, really. None of my identities, none of my job titles, my relationship statuses, none of that matters. That can be kind of scary to say as well. But I think it's also very liberating to release yourself of those things. I think they're binding to think of yourself that way all the time, of this is my job, so therefore this is what I am, or this is what I've always chased after, but now it no longer fits, so I'm not this thing anymore, so what am I? I'm nothing. It's like, you're nothing, but in the best way, because you can be anything now. You get to decide that. You get to decide it consciously rather than having it, conditioned into you or programmed into you by your upbringing or your culture or whatever. But of course, it's scary, it's uncomfortable, it's not easy. This is stuff that happens with time. And I think it's really important that you begin this journey with being honest, just being clear and honest and facing your ego, right? Letting your ego tell you what it's telling you of, no, we have to be this, we have to be that. Hold yourself accountable. Maybe I haven't been acting the best. Maybe I haven't been showing up as kindly as I wish I would have been. Maybe I am not a good person sometimes. Like, maybe there are parts of me that I'm not proud of necessarily. That's okay, right? We don't want to wallow in that, obviously. We don't want to be in that headspace forever. But I think facing it, because that's what's holding you in this identity, right? It's you're scared to face these things, these imperfections, because then you have to think of yourself now as a bad person. It's like, no, you don't. You don't have to lose one identity for a different one, and now you have to take on the identity of being a bad person. No, it's just holding yourself accountable, looking at the parts of your life that you're like, you know what? I don't quite align with this. What else can I do? How can I change this? But you can't even get to that step if you don't take the first step, which is the accountability and the the letting yourself see what you need to see, letting yourself push against your ego, letting yourself be humbled by the fact that you are not perfect, that you do make mistakes, that you are not a good person all the time, because I don't think any of us are all the time. We can try to be, we can try our best. Sometimes we will be good, sometimes we will be bad. It's all part of us, right? And that's okay. But you have to acknowledge it. You have to let yourself see it. And to do that, you have to put down the facade. You have to strip away the identity that you've thought you were this whole time to allow space to let another one come in, but not even an identity. It doesn't have to be like a mask or something. You don't have to find who you are. You are already creating this person. You're creating yourself every day. Every time you take a new step in a different direction, you're creating yourself. You're kind of like a mosaic, I like to think of it, right? You're little pieces of yourself, little moments. And those moments culminate to being you. And they're not always going to make sense to other people. You're not going to be easily explainable or understandable. That's just how humans are. That's just what life is like. You're not a byline. You are not an elevator pitch. You are a person. You have so many facets to you. And that's okay. So it's about shedding the identity that you have for yourself, questioning it, asking yourself, why do I identify this way? Is this true for me? Who told me to be? Ask yourself all those questions, and don't be scared of facing the discomfort of your ego. Don't be scared of acknowledging, like, yeah, I kind of suck sometimes, but it's okay, because we all do at times, right? And I also know that I can change. I do have choice. I do have the ability to shift, even in small ways, and that's okay. And also forgiveness, right? Forgiveness is a big part of this. Acknowledge that there are parts of you that you don't like, that you're not proud of, that you've made mistakes, you feel shameful. Acknowledge that. Let yourself acknowledge it, because it's not going to do you any good to not do that, to hold yourself back from seeing it. But at the same time, you also have to forgive yourself for them. You can't take the step after that without forgiveness. I did this. I'm not proud of it. And also, I made a mistake. We all make mistakes. And now I'm going to try something different. I'm going to try and do better, or I'm going to try and change the way I show up, whatever that is for you. So yeah, I hope this was helpful. I hope it was informative. I hope it gave you a different perspective. If you want to explore this concept or others in more detail, you can book a one-to-one call with me on my website. I also have a Substack where I write about these things, and you can follow my other social media accounts for the rest of my content. But other than that, thank you for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another episode.